For those of you who don't know me, who didn't follow last year, Shed Wars in the Southern Hemisphere. My name's Claire and I do a variety of things on my 5-acre property, and most of that is food forests. I do have some raised beds as well, and a lot of things from seed, so citrus trees and things included, and also the deciduous stuff as well from seed. I know that's not the done thing, and you're told not to do it in case you get something you don't like, but if you do get something you don't like, you can just graft something on that you do like. So it's basically creating that root stock for future producers. We also have a hot tunnel, and we start most of our plants from seed, apart from the trees that are already in and established. Obviously they were started at a nursery, and they're either grafted or usually they're grafted. Sometimes they start them as cuttings and things like that. So anyway, I'm sure you all know that as it is. As for added skills, because that's a thing this year, I do knitting. So I only do simple stitch and simple stuff, like I make the dogs blankets to keep them warm. I can make us like throw over blankets and quilts and things to keep us warm, and those sorts of things with wool. And I use a thicker wool too, because for those of you who don't know me, I'm vision impaired, so I only have about 2% vision in one eye. The other eye doesn't see anything at all. So a lot of it is tactile, done by feel, and you need the bigger wool to actually have that. Well, I do anyway, because of my nerve issues as well, to have that sense of feel with where you're actually, doing your rows and things like that. So I use a thick wool and thick needles. I'm also a massage therapist, and I do mostly working on the nervous system, and that includes improving organ function and messages going to the brain and coming back from the brain and things like that, to do with homeostasis. And I'm studying naturopathy at the moment at university as well, but I have been a herbalist for many years and like to use herbs as medicine rather than using the chemicalized versions that have been produced that normally are based on the constituents of herbs. So that's me in a nutshell. This is my second year doing the Shed Wars videos, and that's about it really. I'm in my food forest at the moment, and I thought I might do a quick little show around of what's going on in the food forest, because that's probably the biggest part of what we do here. Certainly the most surface area. So we'll do that. We also have livestock as well. We have horses that we train to pull carriages and have riders on them. They're ponies actually, and then we sell them. We have bred them in the past, but we're sort of thinking about going back into retraining and things like that. It's a bit more hands-on and enjoyable than waiting for the foal to grow up enough to be trained. So that's basically the changes around here. We are receiving a couple of sheep soon, so we can breed them for meat. They're Dorper sheep, so they're self-shedding. They don't need to be shorn. And we will be getting our chickens back, because we had a bit of a catastrophe where a tree fell on the chicken coop and the chickens were okay, but we had to move them to my mum and dad's place up the road, because obviously there was nowhere for them to be here that was good for them, that's safe, and also good for their way of life. And so that will give us eggs, and we are thinking about doing an all-purpose breed of chicken, so meat and egg chicken. So any advice on that is very much appreciated, because I don't know anything about really, like I know that your Cornish crosses are your meat chickens that you buy in the store, but other than that I don't know about meat chickens. we have had egg chickens for a long time. And that's about it as far as, I think that covers everything. So I'll flip the camera around now and we'll have a look at what's going on in the new part of the food forest. This whole food forest burnt down in 2019, and so this is regenerating everything back, bringing all the fruit trees and everything back since then. So we're going to start in the new food forest that was established this year, and I'll show you what we've got going on in here, and then we'll go into the older one, which was 2020, last year. Well, that's actually, yeah, just the end of 2019, after the fire had been through, we started it, but we'll say 2020 because it's a bit easier. So it's a year old. This one has just begun, and you can see the difference, and also appreciate the growth that we've had in the two, or the 1 and a tiny bit years that we've had the other one. So anyway, let's get into it, and we'll try not to make it too long, but there's never a guarantee with my videos. So that's my introduction, and let's now go for a walk and have a look around what's going on in here. So my camera work is always going to be questionable. I'm sort of just aiming at what I think might be a plant. No, I have a little bit of an idea. But anyway, you can see in this area we've wood chipped everything. They tell you not to do that too, but as you get to know me, you'll know that I do everything they tell you not to do. And it seems to work just fine, because they think that wood chips take the nitrogen out of the soil, which they will if you actually plough them in, or rotary hoe them in, or get them in the soil, they will. But because they're on top of the soil, they can't really possibly suck nitrogen out of soil that they're not really intertwined with, so they're just sitting on top. There's horse manure underneath the wood chips, and then the wood chips, and that's just our native soil underneath that. So our native soil is pretty terrible. You might have seen that last year when we did the shed wars. I think I showed the difference between the soil under the wood chips and the soil on the ground, our native soil. So yeah, it gives you a bit of an idea. There's not a lot of herb layer, or any other layer for that matter, but I have got a couple of little nasturtiums down in here, so that'll bring in the pollinators, and they're doing pretty well. And you can also eat the leaves and the flowers. And then we've got the fruit trees, and then around here we still haven't put those wood chips across like we have here, like flat. They're sort of still in piles. We haven't got to that bit yet, but you can see that the trees are quite young and still developing, and they will this year put on quite a bit of growth, I think. So yeah, that's the new one, and we'll go and have a look at the older one now, which is still pretty new. This is still part of the new. We're going to have this as our main crop area, and also we're going to put some trellises up for the tomatoes this year. The main crop is actually going to move further up eventually, and we'll have more trellises along here where we'll have some grapes and some kiwi fruit growing in between some trees and things like that, to give them a bit of protection from our very hot summer sun. We have rotary hoed this ground, which I don't normally like to do, but it needed that disturbance to actually recover from just being compact and not very, it was more dirt than it was soil, so it wasn't very much life in it anyway, and the roots wouldn't have been able to get down to nutrients from the plants that we planted in there. So we did actually rotary hoe it, and also ploughed it, and then rotary hoed it again, just to create that aeration of the soil. But anyway, that's also part of the new hair area. This is the 1 year old roughly, a little bit over that, but we'll just say 1 year. I did also put some old hay bales that had gone mouldy on the wood chips, and I'll take there's some twine on them still, but it'll come off pretty easily now that they've started to break down, and that'll provide some calcium and some nitrogen and some minerals and stuff from that lucerne hay, which is quite rich in minerals and proteins, and it's also a really good nitrogen source. So that's just going to go down into the ground, and you can actually plant, which I did in winter, plant directly into the hay bales themselves. Just put some dirt on top and plant into them basically. But you can see the pear trees are looking really healthy and happy. This pear tree in particular is only 2 years old. I bought it as a year-old tree, and it was about half the size of that when it got here, so that's a pretty good growth rate there. And then that one's actually an older one, but it hasn't grown as tall, which is fine. And I did prune it a bit because it had a few branches that were sort of crossing over, and that prevents the sun from actually getting onto the fruit when it does fruit. This one will probably fruit next year, I'd say, because it's coming on to 4 years. It did have a little bit of fruit last year, so we'll see what happens there. So we're just coming down past the Dutch pear, and then we've got a apple area. That's my rock I like to sit on. It's just the right shape to be a nice little seat and enjoy the garden. And this area is still to kind of come up. There are a few little weeds on the edges, but we're not too concerned about that. They can just do what they like. So all the leaves are coming up on this mulberry. This is a red mulberry. But underneath here we've got some borage, and it's really pretty. I like the borage. It's a really pretty plant. Over there we've got some elderberry. We've got 2 elderberry plants, and underneath them is some strawberries. So they're doing pretty well. They were very yellow in the leaves last year. I thought that it might have been the variety they are, because I'm not actually sure which variety they are, and I won't know for sure until they actually fruit, whether they're a black or a blue or a, I don't know, there's another colour I can't remember right off the top of my head, but when they fruit we'll know what type they are. But I think it was just they were lacking a bit of nitrogen, so we threw some more horse manure on them and some more wood chips, and you can see that the wood chips are obviously not sucking the nitrogen too much, because they're starting to green up nicely compared to what they were last year, so I'm happy with that. If we go in closer we'll see the little strawberry underneath. Right there. So it will be a ground cover. There's all this useless ground cover that isn't really good for anything other than covering the ground, which I suppose is a positive, and it probably puts some nutrients back in the soil. So the stuff that hasn't gone to seed I'll just pull out and put it down like that and leave it there, and that will create a bit of a weed tea if you like. But obviously if it's gone to seed I'll try and remove it completely, because I don't want it growing there really. I'd rather the strawberries take over this area. Then on this side we've got some thyme down in here. It's gone to flower at the moment. It's really pretty too. I quite like the thyme. So this is all kind of, you know, food forest type idea, where we have the ground covers of the thyme and the strawberries and the parsley and mint and all those sorts of herbs as our sort of ground cover, to sort of stop the weeds. We may as well have useful weeds, if that makes sense. So that's why that's like that. Then down there we've got a young Gumby tree. I don't know if you can see that because he's pretty narrow, and don't know if the camera will pick that up, but underneath where that Gumby tree is going to be is a red currant that I actually thought was dead, but it came back. Then we've got a tiny little fig tree, which you definitely won't be able to see because it's just a little tiny trunk and it hasn't got any leaves yet, but it's a tiny thing. And under that will be the young berry, I think that berry plant is. And there's a few weeds. That's all right, they're not bothering me at the moment. A tiny little peach tree. I think it's a sun gold peach. tiny little thing it is. It's a dwarf variety, but it's, yeah, it should get a bit taller than that. But it has actually grown in size since it's been put in there. It was smaller than that when it got here, so yeah, slow growing. Blueberries over there, I don't know if you can see them, but they're starting to come back now. They went to dormancy over winter, so they're starting to come back again. And they'll look a lot nicer through the year, I think, as long as we don't go through another drought. Lavender. Looking through a chase treeberry tree. Chase treeberry is our equivalent of pepper. It hasn't quite woken up yet, so it's still doing its thing. But yeah, it's our pepper equivalent really, because pepper won't grow in this cold climate. But the chase tree, as you can see, rosemary, and then some chocolate mint is sort of trying to take over this ground area just down in here. So that's that. We've got fig trees over there that are a lot bigger than the other one, and some oregano underneath the first fig tree that's closest to us, and then a hazelnut tree at the end there. Then if we just turn around, don't mind the weeds, it's all pathway and stuff, and I'm not too worried about it because it's not really where I'm growing anything, so I'm quite fine with it still being able to take carbon out of the air and put it into the soil. We've got wormwood, and there's some mugwort growing kind of in that wormwood as well. We've got some wild strawberry down here, or alpine strawberry, which actually propagate or grow from seed rather than from the runners like your normal strawberries do. That's a normal mulberry tree, and that'll protect the strawberries from the extreme heat when it comes back with its leaves. And raspberries on this trellis here, they're starting to come back too. There's a feijoa, and there's another feijoa on the other side. They don't get overly massive, so they'll be a nice little sort of filler for that area without sort of taking it over completely. Some pomegranates up this way, and some loganberry. You can see that sprawled everywhere. Peppermint, and that's about it in this area. So it's starting to look a bit like a forest now, and some oregano on the corner rather than looking just like a... So that's probably the oldest section we've got there, and then this is fairly newish. So we've got a mulberry, that's a white mulberry there, and then we've got the blackberries behind it, and there's a loquat behind that. There's some evening primrose in there as well. So that's that kind of row, and then there's the persimmon, which isn't a very big tree either, but it's just a nice little filler. And there's a peach tree behind that. I don't know if you can see all of this stuff, but I'm just kind of going through what we've got in here. Then we've got a apricot, which hasn't leafed up yet much. It's starting to, but then we've got a rock that looks like Australia, so we call it Australia rock. A bit of hay again, just to boost up the nitrogen. And then we've got a nectarine and a plum on the end. And we've got two hazelnuts behind there's a water pod there that we use to water the garden if we need to water something specifically. And then there's a couple of hazelnuts up there as well. So that's pretty much what's going on in here. And then the other area that I showed you, the first area, has got some more fruit trees. It's got peaches and another couple of plums I think are in there, and another couple of apple trees, some Granny Smiths and things like that, and an almond tree. So yeah, that's it for now, and I look forward to having a bit of fun this year and doing some experiments and all that sort of stuff, and showing, you know, how the blind girl gardens, I guess. So yeah, and that plum tree was a tiny little thing when we first got it last year. It was like less than half the size, I reckon, and it's just really taken off. This year it's come up and it's shooting just everywhere, and yeah, it's really happy where it is, so that's good. And I think that's pretty much it, so I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.